Hi everybody, I'm Pam Bador, and today I want to talk a little bit about the concept of utopia and lay out some of the questions we're going to be considering in this class. When I say the word utopia, what's the first thing you think? You're in an English American Studies class, so you might go straight to the idea that a utopia is a kind of book, a literary genre. But if this were a political science or sociology class, other places where people study utopia, you might think of it as a kind of society, maybe even a kind of perfect society. And that perfect society might be fictional, or it might be a real society, often a pretty small one, almost more of a commune, where people try to create a perfect living situation by living off the grid and having perfect peace and harmony. Or maybe you're thinking that utopia isn't a word you would ever use in a sentence, and today, well into the 21st century, that actually makes perfect sense, because honestly, there aren't a lot of utopian novels or films or TV series out there right now. What's way more popular, as we'll discuss throughout this course, is dystopia. So let me ask you this. Who do you think would write a utopia? What about who would write a dystopia? Would an optimist write a utopia and a pessimist write a dystopia? Well, before we can get to that, I want to give you a sense of where the term utopia comes from. It's actually a very unusual situation with genre fiction. With other genre fictions, like mystery or science fiction or romance or western, the name of the genre reflects what's happening in that kind of literature. But with utopia, this is a made-up word that kind of created a genre. The term was made up by Sir Thomas More, who published the very first utopia ever in 1516. In that book, which is kind of a strange blend of narrative and philosophy, we're introduced to an unknown island called Utopia. We're not going to read Utopia in this class, since this is an American utopian and dystopian class, and More was English, and the book was written in Latin. The book is really interesting, though. Within the book, which starts with a bunch of philosophical discussion, we learn of the island of Utopia, which is in direct contrast to the countries of Europe, and especially the island of Great Britain. You see, on Utopia, everything is clean and orderly and peaceful. Everyone has enough to eat and shelter and meaningful work and, well, a perfect life. Except for the women and slaves. They don't have quite as good a life as everyone else. I said slaves. You see, in Utopia, convicted criminals become slaves, and then sometimes people from nearby and much worse places come by and offer themselves up as slaves. Now, you might be thinking that if Utopia is really a perfect society, it wouldn't have criminals or slavery. And you'd be right. Because Thomas More's book, which is a really cool mix of satire and optimism, sets up something that's absolutely at the center of utopian literature. Paradox. The idea of two opposite things being true at the same time. Which brings us to how great the name Utopia is for the genre that More, totally unbeknownst to himself, founded. Utopia has an awesome etymology. It comes from the Latin eu, or no, and topos, place. So, no place. At the same time, it's a homonym for eu, which means perfect. So, good place or perfect place. Which means that, wait for it, one of the things we're going to study in this class is the idea that the perfect place is always no place. Do you think that could be true? That there's really no such thing as a perfect place, even in our imaginations? There are definitely some good arguments for thinking that. For one thing, as More's Utopia shows us, one person's utopia might be another person's dystopia. Also, if life were really perfect, wouldn't it also be boring? So let me go back to the optimist-pessimist question I asked at the beginning of the presentation. Do you think Utopia is kind of a ridiculously optimistic project? Is thinking that you could imagine a perfect society kind of failed from the start? Well, there is reason to think that. After all, there are hardly any utopian novels in the 21st century, but there are millions of dystopian ones, which suggests that we've kind of tossed out the very idea of utopia. We'll go deeper into dystopia in our next module, but think about dystopia for a moment, the nightmare place. the very certainly horrible, not perfect place. Is it fundamentally pessimistic to write dystopias and to consume them voraciously as a society? So, before I let you go, let me tell you some of the questions that I like to think about, since these will be key questions for the course. What is the purpose of utopia? What about dystopia? Is it the same purpose or a different one? Which is more optimistic, utopia or dystopia? Why is dystopia so much more popular in the 21st century than utopia? And what about apocalypse? How does that genre, where a huge percentage of the population is dying or has died, fit into the utopian and dystopian project? And what can we learn about ourselves, our history, and our culture from studying utopia and dystopia? Keep those questions in mind as you go ahead and read the first utopian text of the semester. This is just a 4-page short story, but I can't stress to you how influential it's been. It's by Ursula K. Le Guin, one of the best-known writers of fantasy, science fiction, and utopia in the 20th and 21st centuries. I don't want to tell you anything else except pay attention to what intrigues you as you read the story. Make some notes for yourself. Think about what you think Le Guin is trying to say. Does she provide us with some tentative answers to any of those questions? You can find the questions in our course site if you'd like to keep them handy as you're reading. Have fun!